everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today is another weekly update. So I've got 8 books to talk to you about today that I finished since last week. And yeah, we've got kind of a mix here. I think I ended up reading 25 books in February, which is pretty good. You know, I feel like I'm starting to get back into my normal reading habits. Like I had kind of talked about how December and January were a little bit slower than my normal. So, you know, I'm pretty pleased overall. So we can go ahead and get started and work our way up from the lowest to the highest rated. So the first book I'll talk about today is a 2.5-star book, and that's Children of Chicago by Cynthia Pelayo. So I got this for review from NetGalley, and this is an adult horror / retelling of the Pied Piper, and it takes place in Chicago, and there's these murders happening that may or may not be related to the Pied Piper and our main character Lauren's past. So this, I'm so sad that I didn't like it more. I really thought that I was going to love it, especially because of this retelling aspect. You know, I love any sort of fairy tale type retellings. So like I had really high hopes for this, and it just like unfortunately didn't quite hit the mark for me. So basically, you know, like I said, I did like these fairy tale aspects quite a bit. I think it's a darker take on things. I'm not super familiar with the Pied Piper itself, but I mean, it does definitely seem like a darker fairy tale in general. And I thought it was interesting to learn more about that particular lore. I definitely enjoyed that. At times it felt almost like an urban legend, which I thought was really cool. You know, like there's, I think, similarities to like Bloody Mary, for instance. And so I really liked those parts. And I do think we have some nice creepy moments. However, the main drawback for me is there is a lot of unnecessary info dumping. I mean, it's just like so much background information that it really detracts from the story for me. Like, we get information about, you know, the Brothers Grimm and just kind of background about fairy tales in general and like how these brothers collected these fairy tales, and like some of that is interesting, and like I do find that fascinating. And actually I think it was like my 8th grade history class, I did a report on kind of the background of, you know, fairy tales and things like that. So it is stuff that I find interesting. I just think it was done in a way that kind of was jarring. Like it would just be, you know, we're following this investigation and then all of a sudden there's just info dumps. So I think, you know, it's like, so that those parts were better at least, but the parts that kind of really bogged me down were just the info dumps about the history of Chicago. And like, I know that some people find Chicago fascinating, but I just don't particularly want to read about the history of buildings during like an investigation, which is like really tense. There were some like choppy timelines and dialogue as well, and I just didn't really care for any of the characters. So, you know, unfortunately, this didn't work for me as well as I wanted. I think it would have worked better for me as a novella. So now we'll move to the 3-star books, and the first book I'll talk about here is The Night Country by Melissa Albert. So this is the sequel to The Hazelwood, and so this is a YA urban fantasy, and it's essentially dealing with these darker fairy tales in this place called the Hinterland. And our main character, Alice, is back in New York City, and some of these other characters from the Hinterland have essentially followed her. And we also have something or someone killing all of these Hinterland beings. So I think this was just not as good as the Hazelwood for me. One of the things that I really liked about the Hazelwood was that we get like little snippets of these darker fairy tales. And we did have a couple of these mentioned in the story, but it just wasn't the same extent, I think, as the Hazelwood. The plot definitely meandered some for me. A lot of it was just more surface level than I really wanted. I think, you know, I could have used more details about these murders and just like the investigation of trying to figure out who was killing all these people. It's definitely readable, but I think it's just a bit bland. There's some choppy point of view switches. We mostly followed Alice, and then suddenly we follow another character, and it was just like a little bit jarring because it was later, I think, in the book than I expected. However, you know, like I did really like this introduction of the Night Country. It's a really dark, fascinating idea. I did mention there's like a couple of fairy tales, and so one of them is like introducing this Night Country and giving us the background here. So I really liked that part quite a bit. I think there's some fun traveling around in general and some cool magical objects. And yeah, so I mean, like, I don't think I liked this quite as much as the Hazelwood, but I am still interested in reading the Tales from the Hinterland, which just came out earlier this year, because I think that is, like, specifically about, like, the fairy tales of the Hinterland, and I think that is the parts of these books that work the best for me. So I have pretty high hopes for that, and I'm, like, still interested in reading that. The next 3-star book I'll talk about is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. So I read this as an ARC from NetGalley, and this comes out August 31st this year. So this is an adult horror, and we follow Jade, who is a horror aficionado, and she starts to suspect that her town is actually the site of events that are basically like those in slasher films. So this was interesting for me. The only other Stephen Graham Jones book I've read was The Only Good Indians, and I liked some of the ideas, but I think some of the particular tropes didn't work for me, and I think his writing is just not quite for me. So I wanted to try more of his books because I wasn't sure if it was just that particular one that didn't work for me. And I will say I did like this more than The Only Good Indians, though I am rating them the same. I think the subject matter just worked a lot better for me here. But again, I just don't think his writing works for me. I find it just a little bit too descriptive, and it's more like literary fiction. That just isn't the most appealing to me. And I found myself getting bogged down in details a bit. So the pacing here was interesting. It had a fantastic beginning. It really throws you in. It was super creepy, and I was like, all right, this is awesome. The middle section, it started off pretty good, and then I just started to lose some steam, and I felt like it meandered a bit, and it was just a little bit of a struggle to get through this, and then it started really ramping up at the end, only to end in a really unsatisfying place for me. So that's kind of why I settled on a 3-star. There were some parts that I really loved, but then some parts that just didn't quite work for me. So, in the middle is totally fine. This particular book has a lot of odes to slasher films, and it's definitely this love letter to horror. So I think that horror fans, in particular of horror movies, will really like this because there's a lot of callbacks to scenes from various horror movies, and there's a lot of just love for these movies. Jade is definitely a super fan, and I think this was mostly enjoyable, but it did get to be a little bit too much for me at times. I really liked watching how she's trying to tell everybody that they're in this slasher film, and she's trying to convince everybody that they're in danger. I did ultimately root for her. She's not going down without a fight, and I like how she's trying to prepare people for what's coming in order to save them. I also think there's some good commentary here about the Indian experience in America. I would describe his books as being a smarter side of horror, I guess. And I think there were some genuinely creepy scenes. So, while I did like this more overall than The Only Good Indians, I just don't think his writing style is quite for me, but I would not hesitate to recommend it if, you're interested in this premise, because I know a lot of people really love his books. So now we'll move to the 3.5-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is Floatland by Trish. So this actually just came out March 2nd, and I had won this in a giveaway. This is an adult romance where Anna's fiance committed suicide, and about a year later, she gets this reminder about this trip that they were supposed to do. So she ends up taking a sailboat by herself to go on this trip, but quickly realizes that she can't actually do this alone, and she hires a professional sailor. So there are obviously major content warnings here for self-harm and suicide, but I will say there is a specific note at the beginning of this letting people know about these content warnings, so I really appreciated that. It does go into detail about not only the method of suicide, but also the suicide note. So this book has a sadder tone overall, though there are some happy moments, obviously. For me, I tend to prefer more rom-coms, so I think this just wasn't quite the type of romance that really works for me. Though, again, like I mentioned, there are some pretty nice and funny moments. I think it's really about Anna processing her grief and her anger and just generally trying to figure out what she needs now and what she wants to do with her life, now that her fiance is no longer here. The romance here is really cute. It's a slow burn romance, and they definitely seem well suited to each other. I really liked Anna. I thought her feelings were really realistic and definitely understandable. I liked how she's going on this trip and doing things for herself, and I liked how she's learning more about herself and how to live without her fiance. She's definitely tenacious, though she does have some perhaps ill-advised ideas. But I liked watching her learn how to sail and just generally try new things. Our love interest is very sweet. He does have a prosthetic leg, and so I think he has a lot of realistic frustrations with people just being really ableist and, thinking that he can't do the same things that he did prior to the accident. I think he's really understanding of Anna and allows her, the space that she needs. But also, I think he does help try to push her to try new things. I really love this setting with these various, like, they're sailing around the Caribbean, and so I liked, going around to all these islands. I just liked the ocean settings in general. Also, there's a really cute dog that we get here. Though I will say I had to pause while reading this because there was something, like, very specific that just, like, kind of brought up some really bad memories that I personally have, but that's just, like, a me thing, and, probably won't be a problem for others. This was pretty enjoyable overall, but not like a new favorite. The next 3.5-star book I'll talk about is Seven Endless Forests by Genevieve Tucholke. So this is a YA fantasy, and it's this standalone companion to the Boneless Mercies. And it's kind of this loose retelling of King Arthur, where we follow Torvi, who is on a quest to rescue her sister and find a mythical sword. And along the way, she and her friends must deal with wolf priests and other people. So, I think, like, this has a really, like, mellow, chill, like, fairy tale type of quality to it. I think it's easy and quick to read. The writing is, just pretty, I guess, in general. I liked the involvement of these Arthurian elements and how some things are changed. There was definitely not as much of this as I anticipated. Like, I would not necessarily describe it as, like, a full retelling of King Arthur. Like, obviously we have this mythical sword, and there are, I think, a sort of, like, Knights of the Round Table that kind of come up, and, there's definitely some elements here, but it's not like an exact retelling. It's still this really lovely world. It seems like there are a lot of things inspired by Norse mythology, so I think that was fun, and I really liked the references to the Boneless Mercies. I would suggest reading the Boneless Mercies before this, because otherwise you'll miss the references. I really liked this quest plotline. I think there's some really fun locations that they visit along the way, including this, like, night market thing, which was super fun. I really enjoyed the characters, in particular Torvi, our main character. She is kind of looked down upon by her mother and her sister because she's really compassionate, and in this culture, they see this as being weak. I think she's genuinely kind, though, and wants to help people, so, I definitely rooted for her. And, I think overall I did have the same issue that I had with the Boneless Mercies, in that I just kind of wanted more from it. It's still a fun book, but I just think more things could be developed, and there's still some, like, open-ended plot lines. The next 3.5-star book I'll talk about is Whisper Down the Lane by McLeod Chapman. So I got an arc of this from NetGalley from the publisher, and this comes out April 6th. So this is an adult horror/thriller that's inspired by the satanic panic of the 80s. We have two timelines here. We have Richard in the present day, and he's a teacher, and basically, like, nefarious things start happening at his school. And then the second timeline follows Sean, who's a kid in the 80s, and it turns out one of his teachers is under investigation. So we'll leave it at that. I do think this leans more towards thriller than true horror. It's really enjoyable overall. I think it was really interesting to me to learn more about the satanic panic. It's definitely uncomfortable to read at times, but, like, because of the subject matter, kind of dealing with accusations of abuse and satanic rituals, but, like, even though it was, like, uncomfortable to read those particular things about, like, the subject matter, it was still, like, really engaging, and, like, I did want to keep reading. I liked seeing the connections between these two timelines. I mean, it's, like, for me, it was pretty obvious what was going on. There are, I think, just, like, in terms of some of the mysteries here, I did eventually guess some things right before the reveal of what was happening, but I did end up having, like, a few theories of things going on. But I did like that it kind of kept me guessing a bit. I think going back to this kind of tough subject matter with these accusations, and, I think it deals a lot with kids saying what they think their parents want to hear and how this can kind of have some consequences. There are some content warnings for animal death and obviously these accusations. It's a really interesting exploration of the topic, though, and I really actually liked both timelines equally. I liked following Richard. I think he's trying to be this good stepfather and a good teacher. One of the characters that I absolutely hated, though, was this therapist that Sean ends up having. I think she is a little bit manipulative, and I don't love her. But yeah, so this is the second book that I've read by this author, and, I've enjoyed this one as well, and would definitely recommend it if this is something that you're interested in. So now we'll skip all the way up to 4.5 stars, and the first book I'll talk about here is The Dead Season by Tessa Wegert. This is the second book in the series, and it's the sequel to A Death in the Family. So this is an adult thriller. We follow Shayna, who is this investigator, and she had previously been abducted by the serial killer, and is kind of still dealing with some fallout from that. One day, her uncle's skeleton is discovered in her hometown, and this serial killer, who shares this hometown, challenges her to solve this cold case, or he'll kidnap and kill again, and this blood will be on her hands. So I think this was really great. I think it was, for me, even better than the first book, which I also really liked. I think it really developed some of these aspects that I was super curious about in the first book in a really satisfying way. In particular, learning more about the serial killer and Shayna's past. There are some tense moments. We do have this dual investigation going on of not only this cold case, but also a missing child. And I really liked both of these mysteries. I think there were some unexpected things that popped up in this story overall. It's definitely fast-paced and interesting. I started and finished it in a day. I think I actually read it in one sitting, so, it definitely kept me engrossed. Our main character, Shayna, is definitely dealing with some PTSD from being abducted by the serial killer, and I thought this felt pretty realistic. I think she's trying to cope with things and prove to herself and others that she can still handle investigations. I like seeing how she takes karate lessons and is learning self-defense. I can definitely appreciate how she's wanting to protect herself and also just generally not get caught in these same situations again. I really liked learning more about her family here as well. There's also a possible start to a romance that I'm definitely here for, so I really liked that. So we'll kind of keep it short because it is a thriller and I don't want to spoil things, but I've really enjoyed the series so far and I can't wait to see what happens next. So the last book I'll talk about today is also another 4.5 star book, and that's The Patience of a Dead Man by Michael Clark. So this is an adult horror, and we follow Tim, who buys this old farmhouse in New Hampshire to renovate after his recent divorce. However, it turns out to be haunted. So this one's just so much fun. There were definitely some creepy moments. I read it at night, which really ended up freaking me out, and there were times where I had to set the book down, and I had to set it down with this cover face down because I was this is just too much for me. I have to put it down so it can't see me. So that was, just pretty funny. There's a few drawings of things throughout the book, and I thought this was a really nice touch that helped with picturing things. I think the plot moves along nicely. I definitely wanted to keep reading it. There's a nice mix of spooky parts as well as this investigation and home renovation, and all of these worked really well for me. I definitely enjoyed uncovering the mystery here. I wasn't really sure what to expect from some of these ghosts, but I was pretty pleasantly surprised with where it went. I liked our characters Tim and this real estate agent Holly. I think, Tim is obviously just trying to put his life back together after his divorce, and I definitely liked seeing how he's attempting to help the ghosts move on. Holly is fun. I think she seems really nice, and I liked seeing how she kind of takes charge of the investigation. Mildred is a creeper. Oh my god. She's definitely ominous. You can really tell, right away that she is not Casper the Friendly Ghost. I felt scared for our characters, so I think, this was all done really well. I will say there were a couple of sentences that seemed a little stilted or simplistic, but generally I think this was easy to read and this wasn't really a big deal at all. So I really loved this, and I definitely want to keep reading this series. So this was actually my first completed matchup of the March Battle of Books. I had this going against My Heart is a Chainsaw, and I correctly predicted that I would enjoy this more. So I'm super happy about this. I'm excited to see how this compares with whatever wins the other side of that matchup. So yeah, this was a fun time. So those are all the books that I've finished since last time, and the books that I'm currently reading right now are The Fate of the Tearling, and I'm doing this as a buddy read with Kat from Brews and Reviews, and then I'm also reading Tiny Pretty Things, which is kind of I don't know, drama at a ballet academy, and it's super fun. I'm having a good time with it so far. So yeah, I will probably finish this one maybe this weekend, and this one hopefully today, so you'll have that to look forward to. I think that's it for today. I can't remember if there was anything else that I was going to update you all with, so I guess we'll just end it here. So let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. for your question of the day, have you read a horror book that you had to do similar things with, you know, me hiding the cover or anything like that? And I guess if you've made it this far and don't want to answer that question that is oddly specific, leave a ghost emoji if those exist to let me know you're here. I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.